Hello. In today's episode, we are with Elias Stasinos. Let's start with a basic question. Elias, what do we mean when we say that we live in our mind and not with awareness of the external world?
Excellent question. We mean the idea that the world we experience is not directly the external world, but a representation of that external world in our mind. We do not see the world with our eyes, but as a reflection of the world in our mind. Each person has their own unique perception of reality, shaped by their experiences, memories, and beliefs. We see the world through these filters. Thus, we could say that there are as many worlds as there are people. For example, imagine a simple object such as a rose. When you look at it, you see a beautiful flower. But for someone with a rose allergy, the same flower can cause anxiety. For a florist, it can represent his income. The same object evokes different reactions and emotions in different people because each person experiences it through the filter of their own mind. But how do we explain the common experiences we share? That is, when we look at the moon, we all see the same moon. The answer is that while our experiences are subjective, there is often a common ground in how we perceive the world. This is because we share similar biological structures and social experiences. However, even in these shared experiences, there are subtle differences in how each of us experiences them. The external world is like a stimulus for our mind. It provides the raw materials from which our mind creates our experience of reality. For example, when we buy a new item or go to a beautiful place, these external experiences trigger the release of hormones such as serotonin or dopamine, which make us feel happy. But real happiness comes from the way our minds interpret and process these experiences. It's just a matter of how we think. This doesn't mean we can simply think ourselves happy in every situation, but the way we interpret and react to our experiences has a huge impact on our well-being. For example, meditation can cause the release of the same happy hormones as those caused by external stimuli. Dreams are a great example of how our mind can create full, vivid experiences without any external stimulus. When we dream, we experience an entire world created entirely by our mind. We laugh, we cry, we feel fear or joy. All these emotions are real, even though the world that causes them is a creation of our mind. This shows how powerful the mind is in shaping our reality.
Exciting. How can we apply this knowledge in our daily lives?
There are several ways. First, understanding that we live in our minds can help us take more responsibility for our experiences. Instead of blaming the outside world for our problems, we can focus on how we react to them. Second, we can use techniques such as meditation or visualization to program our minds in a positive way. As we said earlier, these practices can have real measurable effects on our biochemistry and overall well-being. This understanding can help us be more compassionate towards others. When we realize that everyone lives in their own unique world, it becomes easier to understand and accept different perspectives. I would like to emphasize that the idea of living in the mind does not mean that the external world is not real or important. Instead, it invites us to look more closely at the relationship between our inner and outer worlds. It encourages us to take more responsibility for our experiences and recognize the enormous power we have in shaping our own reality. As the famous spiritualist, Shankara said, "If you can conquer your mind, you can conquer the whole world." This is not just a metaphor, it is a profound truth about the nature of our reality. Understanding that we live in our minds is actually a critical step towards realizing non-duality. Let's break it down. First, the realization that our experience of the world is a creation of our mind begins to dissolve the illusion of separation between self and other. When we understand that the world we experience is actually a projection of our mind, we begin to see how we are fundamentally interconnected with everything we perceive. Second, this understanding helps us recognize the temporary and fluid nature of our thoughts and perceptions. As in dreams, where entire worlds can appear and disappear in an instant, so our thoughts and perceptions in waking life are equally ephemeral. This helps us disengage from identification with our thoughts and perceptions, which is a critical step in the practice of non-duality. Third, the recognition that we live in our mind naturally leads us to the question, who is it that observes the mind? This question is at the heart of many non-dual practices, such as self-inquiry in Advaita Vedanta. As we delve into this question, we begin to realize the presence of pure consciousness that lies beyond mind and thoughts. Fourth, this understanding can help us cultivate an attitude of non-attachment and acceptance. When we recognize that our experiences are creations of the mind, we can observe them with greater detachment, without being so easily swayed by them. This can lead to a deeper sense of inner peace and balance. Finally, recognizing that everyone lives in their own world can foster a deeper sense of compassion and unity. Instead of seeing others as separate entities, we begin to see them as different expressions of the same fundamental consciousness. This can lead to a more compassionate and unifying attitude towards all beings.
It seems that this understanding can transform not only our personal experience, but also the way we relate to the world around us.
Practicing non-duality is not just a philosophical exercise, but a way to experience the world with greater clarity, compassion, and freedom. As we deepen the understanding that we live in our mind, we begin to perceive the underlying unity that permeates all experience. This can lead to a deep sense of peace and fulfillment that transcends the ordinary fluctuations of life.
What you say is very interesting. But I have a question. If all this happens in our mind, where does the idea that there is a certain character, an I inside our mind, come from?
A deep and important question. The idea of a fixed, distinct self, or I, is what in Advaita Vedanta philosophy we call ahamkara, or egoism. This sense of I arises from a series of identifications made by the mind. We identify with our bodies, our thoughts, our emotions, our memories, our roles in society, and so on. All these identifications accumulate to create the sense of a coherent, continuous self. However, from the perspective of non-duality, this sense of self is actually an illusion. It's like an image projected on a screen. It looks real and solid, but when we examine it more closely, we realize it's just a projection with no substance of its own.
Okay, but how can we be sure that our self is really an illusion?
It is indeed a radical idea, and understanding it requires deep introspection and practice. However, we can begin to explore this in a few simple ways. Notice how your sense of self changes over time. Are you the same person you were 10 years ago, 20 years ago? If the self were fixed and unchanging, should it not remain the same? Try to locate that self. Is it in your body, in your mind, in your feelings? The more you search, the harder it becomes to find something concrete that you can call yourself. Notice how your sense of self changes in different situations. For example, when you are deeply engrossed in an activity or in a dreamless sleep, where is your self? The idea is not to deny the existence of the experience of self, but to recognize that this experience is a creation of the mind, not an absolute reality.
Really, exciting and challenging. How can this understanding affect the way we live our lives? Understanding the illusory nature of the ego can have profound effects on our lives.
It can free us from many anxieties and worries that come from too much identification with a limited self. It helps us to be more flexible and adaptable, as we are not so attached to a certain idea of who we are. It can lead to greater compassion and understanding for others, as we begin to see that their selves are just as fluid and constructed as our own. Ultimately, it can lead us to a deeper sense of freedom and peace, as we begin to identify less with the limited aspects of our experience and more with the underlying consciousness that observes them. Created by Elias Stasinos. Please like and subscribe.